תודה על הדרך המשותפת, שאתה עוזר לי להביא את הקול הזה החוצה. אני רוצה לבקש ולקוות שהעבודה הזאת תביא תועלת, תוכל להעצים אנשים, תעזור ליצור שיתופי פעולה ולקחת את האנשים שיפגשו אותה למקום טוב יותר. זאת התקווה שלי עם העבודה הזו. In this work, in this series that I hope we're gonna, series of talks that we're gonna put together to address some of the central issues we are facing now as, let's say, the human society. It is my perception that we are at a critical point, that there is a certain quantum leap that we are facing. At this point of the process of human development. This talk is going to be done under the assumption that the process that we are going through is in fact a process of spiritual conscious evolution and not a physical evolution. And in that process we come to a critical point. We acquired a lot of skills, a lot of power, and a lot of knowledge about the world we are living in. But we have to come to a point where we apply all those skills and knowledge in a way that doesn't harm either us or the environment. Otherwise, the consequences might be fatal in a way. The framework that I'm going to use in those talks are the framework of paradigms or worldviews. The fundamental shift that has to take place, in my view, is a change in the way we perceive ourselves and the world. So we look at how that shift might take place. The main line is moving from a divisive, dualistic worldview into a unifying worldview, one in which we don't experience ourselves as separate from each other and separate from the world, and instead we're starting to act as we are part of the world and as we are actually operating as a one community. That notion, that idea, unifying worldview, were a place where actually most of the great teachers in the history of mankind came from. Most of them talked about it, and inherently knew that that's where we are heading. I would add to that the idea that a place where we cease fighting against each other, where we cease acting in a way that destroy the environment what we live in, things that the prophets were talking about, the great teachers were talking about, as the final destination of human race, is misleading, is actually to a very large extent, a starting point. It is almost insane to think that to act in a destructive way, the way we are acting right now, is normal. It's almost like saying that the destination of an addict is just to release himself of an addiction. It's only when he's out of his addiction he can start thinking about what he wants to be. So for us to come to a place where we stop destroying each other and hurting each other, and stop destroying the planet we're living in, can be equivalent to that place where an addict is getting freed of his addiction, and then he can start looking at what he wants to be and how he wants to live in the world. So what we'll be looking at in this series is the various ways and tools where we can actually take responsibility for who we are, for the world we live in, and for the destiny that we want to have on this planet. And in this first session I want to talk about what actually enables us to have that frame of worldview, of paradigm, of perception of who we are, which is actually one of the main tools that we use as we work in the world. We describe the process of the last 70,000 years or so as a process of revolutions, of the changes we went through. I'd say it actually was not a process of revolution, but an evolution, and mostly an evolution of consciousness. The physical structures of human being hasn't changed practically at all in that period of time, not the genome and not the body or not anything of that physical structure. What have changed is our consciousness, the way we look at the world, and our conscious tools that we apply as we act in the world. And we go over those things along those talks. But first, the first revolution that we are talking about is the language revolution, about 70,000 years ago, it's estimated. So I want to talk about the way we use language, because we use language in a very different way than any other creatures that we know currently on the planet do. And what is unique about that is that we associate symbols not with the actual thing we experience at the moment, but with an idea we hold in our consciousness. So when we develop the ability to use language, what we actually do, we develop a layer of consciousness that reflects our experience of the world. So, for instance, if I say now sunset on the beach, which I don't see it at the moment, it connects to an image that I have in my consciousness of a sunset of the beach. And when I say that phrase to other people, they have the same image as well. So that's how we communicate. If you try to connect for, let's say, my dog, a phrase with something which is not connected to his immediate experience, he won't be able to relate to it at all. You put an image of food, he won't relate to it. He could relate to a smell, he could maybe relate when he watch a mirror, but anything distant from that, he won't relate at all. No other entity living currently on the planet is doing what we do. And that layer of consciousness which we develop over time is actually the main tool we use to communicate, and that's what enables us to do what we do right now. The fact that I am just talking and it makes sense is because it reflects in the consciousness of the people who listen to me. But that layer is not a copy of the environment we live in. It is not like a drone we have right now that's taking a picture of the environment we live. It actually has a much wider range. It can be likened to a puzzle that we play with. We can actually take all those images that we build in our consciousness and play with them. So next to the experience that we have in the real world, we also have the whole field of consciousness that we play as an image of the world. And that gives us an ability to do extraordinary things. What we do in that consciousness aspect, for example, the perception of past, present, and future exists only in our consciousness. Our experience is only of present moment. So our ability to predict into the future is part of that aspect of consciousness. Our ability to conceive physical laws. We may see the apple drop from the tree. We don't see anything else. To assume or to derive from that the fact that there is a law governing that, and that law applies to other parts that work in our experience, is all aspect of our consciousness. Our ability to plan and design, to look into the future and plan, is all aspect of our consciousness. No other creatures currently living on this planet can do that. There are many creatures that, for example, can build very complex construction, let's say bees. But you won't find bees sitting and planning their next structure and thinking which place will be the best to weather the winter. You won't find a group of birds making plans of where they're going to fly in the winter or in the summer, or bears trying to plan what they're going to do in the next season. You won't see that happen. The only creature living now on that planet that can do that is us. And that's his extraordinary power. So our ability to, the next thing that it enables, the whole concept of higher consciousness, the concept of divine, is all in our consciousness. The concept of God, of the various aspects of it. So in fact, our ability to write philosophy that has a concept, to devise a concept about the life we live, is part of our consciousness. The whole fact that we have philosophy about life, again, we are the only creature on the planet currently that does that, that has that idea. Our ability to devise spiritual paths or religions are an aspect of our consciousness. Further, our ability to use mathematics, and I'll talk about that further in one of our next sessions, how mathematics works. Because mathematics depends on our ability to identify every object for its uniqueness, as well as its connection to other families, being part of a larger group. So our ability to use mathematics depends on our consciousness, our ability to use the whole scientific field, to devise scientific ideas, scientific principles, and scientific premises. When we make a premise that we are going to test in the world, the premise itself, and we never make a premise that doesn't want to test some idea that we have about the world, is an aspect of our consciousness. So the whole scientific field for what it is and where it brought us is part of that field of consciousness that it's unique to us as humans. And a part of that, of us having that field of consciousness that allow us to use language and to communicate the way we communicate and to educate, the whole field of education that we have, the fact that we can take children, people, sit them in a room and have a lecture is because we have that field of consciousness. All of that is an aspect of the uniqueness of who we are as people. But the very important part of that, as in that part of consciousness, we not only have our image of the world, but our unique point of view of it. That image that we have is never standing alone. It is, unless we say the grass is green, the sky is blue, this is simple observation. But anything beyond that, even if I'm saying I'm cold or I'm hot, it's already containing my perception of that. So inside this perception we have of the world, it's our worldview. And part of our evolution, both personally and collectively, is the evolution of the worldview we have of the world. As it stands right now, most of the worldviews we held so far are what we call dualistic worldviews that rest on division. The rest of how one part is being separated from the other. Religion often stands on God as a separate from the world He has created. Science looked as matter as separate from all our spiritual and consciousness aspect. Spirituality, often the spiritual paths we devise, not all of them, there over there we have many different. In our aspect we have variation. But often rejected the material world and looked at the spirit and consciousness as something that stands alone. Those divisions are in many ways the root cause our sense of insecurity, alienation from the world, alienation from each other. Most of our fears are rested in our sense of not belonging to the world or separate from the world. They are in many ways the root cause of most of the conflicts we experience and keep generating in the world. So much of what we tend to refer to as suffering that we experience in the world, and I'll talk much more about the concept of suffering and how does that plays out, is actually can be linked to divisive worldviews. And the main transition that now needs to take place is to move from worldviews that are based in divisions to worldviews that are centered in unity, in the way things are connected, interdependent, and supporting each other in the process of growth, and not coming one on the expense of each other. So most of the talks we're going to do are actually going to be on that line, on that movement that is taking place now, from divisive dualistic worldview to worldviews that are based on unity.